A farmer in rural Japan opened a clay pot that had been sealed and buried in his family's storage shed for 4 years. Inside were seeds, tomato, cucumber, and radish, seeds his grandfather had packed in there before he died. No refrigeration, no vacuum seal, no special packaging. The shed had no climate control, hit freezing temperatures in winter and baking heat in summer. By every rule the modern seed industry teaches, those seeds should have been dead. Germination rates dropped below 10% after 2 years of standard storage. After 4 years in uncontrolled conditions, most commercial seed companies would tell you to throw the whole batch away and buy new packets. He planted them anyway. Every single variety germinated, not at 10%, not at 50%, at rates that matched freshly purchased seed from a catalog. His neighbor, who had stored seeds from the same harvest in the paper envelopes they came in, had a 0% germination rate on the same varieties. The difference was not luck. It was not some genetic anomaly in the seeds. It was what surrounded them inside that pot. A pale, crumbling, completely ordinary coating of dried clay dust that cost absolutely nothing to make and had been protecting seeds in exactly this way for longer than written agricultural records exist. What you are about to learn was not discovered recently. It was not developed in a laboratory. It was practiced by farmers across at least 4 separate ancient civilizations who arrived at the same method independently, through observation and necessity, and passed it forward through generations of direct agricultural knowledge. And then the seed industry grew large enough to make that knowledge inconvenient, and it began to disappear. Not because it stopped working, because a method that lets you store and replant your own seeds indefinitely at zero cost is structurally incompatible with a business model built on selling you new seeds every single season. This is the story of seed balls, or more specifically of clay seed coating. The method of encasing seeds in a protective shell of dry clay, mixed with a small amount of organic material, then storing or directly planting them in that form. And once you understand what the clay is actually doing at the biological and chemical level, you will understand why this is not a folk remedy or a nostalgic tradition. It is a scientifically sound preservation and planting system that outperforms modern commercial seed storage in multiple measurable ways. Here is what is actually happening inside that clay coating. Raw seeds are biologically vulnerable. Moisture triggers germination, and even trace moisture from fluctuating humidity can initiate the germination process inside a stored seed, depleting its energy reserves without ever producing a plant. Oxygen exposure causes oxidative degradation of the seed's cellular structures over time. Temperature swings stress the dormancy mechanism seeds use to stay viable. And physical damage during handling, sorting, and storage chips away at the protective seed coat that keeps the embryo intact. Clay addresses all of these simultaneously. When dried correctly, a clay coating creates a microenvironment around the seed that buffers against humidity fluctuations, limits direct oxygen contact, insulates against minor temperature swings, and physically protects the seed from mechanical damage. The seed inside is not just stored, it is isolated from the conditions that degrade it. And because clay is porous at the microscopic level, it does not seal the seed in an anaerobic environment that would cause other problems. It breathes, but it breathes slowly, it filters, it regulates. When the clay-coated seed is planted or simply placed in soil and rain arrives, the clay absorbs moisture and softens. The seed inside receives a gradual, regulated hydration signal rather than a sudden flood. The germination trigger fires cleanly, with the seed's full energy reserves intact, into a microenvironment that has already been partially prepared by the clay's interaction with the surrounding soil. The germination rates this produces are not marginally better than uncoated seeds. They are dramatically better, particularly in poor soil conditions, in variable climates, and in seeds that have been stored for multiple seasons. And the storage life extension is not modest. Seeds stored in proper clay coating in dry, reasonably cool conditions have demonstrated viable germination rates after 5, 6, and in some documented cases more than 10 years. The commercial standard for most vegetable seeds without special treatment is 1 to 3 years. Clay does not just match commercial storage, it exceeds it, using dirt. Now here is the part that should make you genuinely angry if you think about it clearly. The global seed market is worth over $60 billion annually. That market is built on seed turnover. On the agricultural and gardening norm that seeds are an annual purchase, a recurring cost, a thing you acquire at the beginning of every season because last year's seeds are no longer reliable, seed patents, hybrid varieties that do not breed true, and the systematic erosion of seed-saving knowledge in mainstream agricultural education all serve the same structural function. They keep you in the purchasing cycle. A farmer or gardener who saves their own seeds, stores them effectively, and replants them indefinitely is not a customer. And the method that allows ordinary people to store open-pollinated seeds for 5 or more years in a clay coating made from backyard soil costs the seed industry a customer for every person who learns it. This is not paranoia. This is the straightforward economics of a market that profits from dependency. The seed industry did not sit down in a boardroom and decide to suppress clay seed coating. It simply had no incentive to promote it, no mechanism to profit from teaching it, and every incentive to promote the narrative that seeds are fragile, time-sensitive, and require fresh annual purchases to ensure reliable germination. That narrative is not entirely false. For commercial hybrid seeds stored in paper envelopes on a hardware store shelf, it is largely accurate. But for open-pollinated varieties stored correctly in clay, it is a story that benefits the seller far more than the grower. You have been living inside the purchasing side of this story your whole life. Every spring seed catalog that arrives in the mail, every rack of new seed packets at the garden center in March, every article telling you to check the date on your seed packets and toss anything older than 2 years. These are not lies exactly. They are true within a specific context that the industry has spent decades normalizing as the only context. The alternative context, the one where seeds are a renewable resource you manage and preserve yourself across seasons and years, was never given equal airtime because it generates zero revenue. Here is exactly how to make clay-coated seeds, and the materials required are almost insultingly simple. You need dry clay soil or pure powdered clay, which you can find in almost any yard that has clay-heavy ground, or purchase as plain potter's clay powder for a few dollars. You need finished compost or finely sifted soil, which provides a small nutritional buffer around the seed as it germinates, and you need water. That is the complete material list. The ratio is roughly 5 parts clay powder to 1 part compost, to just enough water to make the mixture hold together without being wet. You want a consistency that can be rolled between your palms without sticking to your hands. Too wet and the coating will crack badly as it dries. Too dry and it will not adhere to the seeds at all. The right consistency feels like firm Play-Doh. When you pinch a small amount and press it between 2 fingers, it holds its shape without crumbling and without smearing. Take your seeds and place them in a bowl. Add a small amount of the clay mixture and begin rolling, either turning the bowl in circular motions or using your hands to coat each seed individually. The goal is a smooth, even layer roughly 3 to 5 millimeters thick around each seed. Not so thick that it becomes difficult for the emerging seedling to break through, and not so thin that the protective barrier is compromised. Roll them on a dry surface or a sheet of newspaper to maintain their round shape as the outer layer begins to firm up. Then you dry them. Lay the coated seeds out in a single layer on a tray or board in a warm, well-ventilated area out of direct sunlight. Direct sun can dry the clay too fast, causing surface cracking that compromises the seal. Let them dry slowly for 24 to 48 hours until the clay coating is completely hard and pale. When you tap 2 coated seeds together, they should sound faintly hollow and click like small pebbles. That sound tells you the moisture is gone and the structure is set. For storage, place the dried seed balls in a dry container, a glass jar, a clay pot, a paper bag. Any breathable or sealed dry container works, depending on your climate, humidity, and store in a cool, dark location, a pantry shelf, a root cellar, a shaded storage area. They do not need refrigeration. They need stable, dry conditions. Check them every few months, and if you notice any sign of moisture getting into the container, remove the seeds and re-dry them before returning them to storage. Here is what most people get wrong when they try this, and the mistakes are predictable enough that knowing them in advance will save an entire batch. The most damaging mistake is using soil that has too much sand content rather than genuine clay. Sandy soil does not have the binding properties that make the coating structurally stable. It falls apart during drying or crumbles when handled. Test your soil first by wetting a small amount and trying to roll it into a thin snake shape. Clay-heavy soil will hold the shape. Sandy soil will crumble. If your local soil is too sandy, use purchased potter's clay powder, which costs almost nothing at a craft supply store, and has predictable clay content. The second mistake is rushing the drying process. People move their coated seeds into storage while the clay is still slightly soft, and then the seeds stick together into an unusable clump. Full hardness takes the time it takes. A fully dried seed ball should feel like a small stone, not like firm cheese. The third mistake is coating hybrid seeds rather than open pollinated or heirloom varieties. Clay coating extends storage life and protects viability, but it cannot fix the fundamental trait of hybrid seeds, which is that they do not breed true to the parent plant. If you are investing in long-term seed saving and storage, it is only worth doing with open pollinated varieties whose offspring will reliably reproduce the same plant. The history of this method reaches back to places and times that reframe what we think of as primitive versus sophisticated in agriculture. Masanobu Fukuoka, the Japanese farmer and philosopher whose natural farming methods influenced organic agriculture movements worldwide, popularized seed balls in his 1975 book as part of a no-till, no-intervention farming philosophy. But he was not inventing anything. He was reviving a practice with roots stretching back thousands of years. Ancient Egyptian agricultural records describe clay wrap seeds being transported and stored for use in new settlement locations. The technique appears in traditional farming knowledge across parts of China and India, where it was used not just for storage but for direct broadcast planting across large areas of difficult terrain, dropping clay seed balls from hillsides to plant slopes that could not be tilled by hand. Indigenous communities across the American Southwest used clay-coated seeds to manage desert planting conditions, protecting seeds from desiccation and predation in environments where unprotected seeds had almost no survival rate on the surface. In each of these places, the method emerged from the same logic. Seeds are valuable, conditions are harsh. The best protection is the earth itself, shaped around the seed, carried with it. That logic did not become less true when synthetic alternatives appeared. It became invisible, and invisible knowledge, even when it works perfectly, does not feed anyone who has not yet learned it. The seed in the clay ball knows exactly what to do. It has been doing it for millions of years, waiting for the right moisture, the right temperature, the right moment. The clay does not alter that process. It just protects the seed's ability to wait as long as it needs to. It holds the possibility open. It refuses to let circumstances declare the seed dead before the seed itself has made that decision. There is something worth sitting within that image. The practice of preserving seeds is not just a food security strategy. It is a refusal to accept that the ability to grow your own food should be a service you subscribe to. Every seed you coat and store correctly is a small, hard, clay-covered act of independence. An assertion that the knowledge of how to feed yourself belongs to you, not to a catalog, not to a patent holder, not to a market cycle. If this changed the way you think about the seeds you buy every spring and what you could be doing with them instead, share it with someone who grows food. The most durable things humans have ever created were not made in factories. They were made by people who understood what they already had and refused to throw it away.